Gemara starts on Chavav Amud Aleph. God willing, we'll go to the end of that Amud. So again, Chavav Amud Aleph is in the front where the Gemara starts until the two dots at the bottom of the line of the Amud. If you're using the back with the elucidated art scroll, it would be 26A2. 26A2 from where the Gemara begins. So let's see. So the Gemara starts off saying, with the Mishnah had told us that there was Shlosha Mekomos. There was three spots where throughout the night in the Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim would stand as an honor guard, as a way to give cover to the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara rather begins as follows. Minohani Mili, how do we know that there's any concept of guarding that's required in the Beis Hamikdash overnight? Where do we even get such a concept from? So the Gemara tells us it's going to be based on a pasuk that's in Sefer Bamidbar, in Parshas Bamidbar. It says, Amar Rabbi, Amar Kra, the pasuk tells us, V'achonim lefnei HaMishkan kedma. So those who camped before the Mishkan to the east, lefnei Ol Moed Mizracha. So it says before the Ol Moed, before the tent of meeting to the east, Moshe v'Aaron ubanav shomrim mishmeres hamikdash l'mishmeres b'nei Yisrael. It was Moshe, Aaron, and the sons. They were the ones who were guarding of the sanctuary for the guard of Bnei Yisrael. That's a pasuk that tells us that it seems to require some form of shmirah, some form of an honorific guard. Now, granted, that was talking about the Mishkan, but it's assumed that if that was necessary for the Mishkan, it would have been also necessary to show that kind of cover for the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. So now the Gemara says back, I don't know if that's such a great proof, a great source for this. Okay, the pasuk is talking about there's got to be some form of a guarding. Okay, I grant you that. The pasuk says there's some form of shimur that takes place in front of the Mishkan and then in front of the Beis Hamikdash would follow. However, our Mishnah told us more than that. Our Mishnah told us that there was three designated spots. Where do you find a makor for this? Where do you find any source in the Torah telling us that not just is there got to be some shimur, not just is there some form of watching that's taking place, but that it's got to be in three designated areas? So the Gemara says as follows, and also more than that, V'alavim be'esrim ve'achad makom. And Levium, in addition to these three spots where Kohanim would stand guard, Levium would stand guard at 21. Now, our Mishnah did not tell us yet about that. That's actually a Mishnah in Maseches Midos. The next Mishnah, the next Maseches that follows, Maseches Midos, there it talks about that the 21 spots that the Levium would stand in addition to these three Kohanim. So he wants to know, where do we get this idea from, that the Kohanim got to be in three spots, and then there's additional spots for Levium? What's the basis for this? So the Gemara tells us, and furthermore, and furthermore, the pasuk that you pointed to was talking about Moshe, Aaron, and the children. What do you see? You're mixing together Kohanim and Levium, because Moshe wasn't a Kohen, Moshe was a Levi. But Aaron, Aaron and his children, his sons, they were Kohanim. So he says that's another issue I've got with this pasuk, is that it seems like you're mixing them all together. And I know from Mishnais it's going to be here, it's just specifically spelled out Kohanim, but in Midos it spells out that Levium had their own stations. So what's that based on? So the Gemara says as follows. Amri hachi kamar. He says this is how we have to darshan the pasuk. We're going to put a comma in the pasuk in a very strategic location. The Gemara says as follows. V'achonim lefnei hamishkan kedma lefnei ol moed mizracha Moshe. Comma. It says the way you've got to break up this pasuk is as follows: is that there was people who were camping before the Mishkan to the east, and that was before the ol moed to the east. That was Moshe. The Hadar, and then later it tells us, but Moshe wasn't in the form of, let's say, Shmira, so to say. But then the pasuk says, "V'hadar Aaron ubanav shomrei mishmeres hamikdash." Then the pasuk goes on and says, Aaron and his sons. Remember, Aaron has two remaining sons. Nadav and Avihu died. It's Elazar and Isamar. So there's three. So now you've got three Kohanim where the pasuk specifically talks about a form of shmira. Aaron b'chad makom. It's telling us clearly that Aaron would be stationed in one spot. Ubanav b'shtei makomos, and his two other sons, Elazar and Isamar, they would be stationed at individual spots themselves. So he's telling us that's how to read this pasuk. So now the pasuk is breaking up Kohanim and Levium, and even amongst Kohanim, it's telling us that there was three specific locations where they would be stationed for that honor guard at the time that Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar and in front of the Mishkan. So the Gemara goes on now and says something else. The Gemara says, Mimai, but what made you think of it this way? Why does the pasuk seem to be saying this? Because the pasuk started off talking about chonim. Chonim means those who camped out, which now we're saying is talking about Moshe and the Levium. And then it says shomrim, which is talking about the Kohanim. It's talking about two different terms. That's what you clearly see the pasuk saying. Chonim l'chud v'shomrim l'chud. This seems to imply that this was a distinct group that is going to be classified under chonim and a different group under shomrim. So that's how I know that Levium and Kohanim, in their various positions where they would be stationed to serve in this honor guard, that's how I know that they would be distinct, that they weren't going to be grouped together. So the Gemara says, I'm not so sure about this way to read the pasuk. Maybe all of them, meaning the Kohanim, maybe they all stood in one place. Okay, I got it, that Kohanim and Levium are separated. But who says that the Kohanim are in three separate locations? Maybe the Kohanim were all together. Why are we reading the pasuk to tell us that the Kohanim were in three different locations? So the Gemara says, Lo salka daitach, don't think that. It says, Kamosha. Ma Moshe b'chad makom l'chudei, just like Moshe was in one spot by himself. Af Aaron u'banav b'chad makom l'chudei. So it says the first answer the Gemara says is as follows: is that because we're looking at Moshe? The pasuk says there was the chonim was really Moshe, and then it says the shomrim was Aaron u'banav. Just like Moshe had his distinct area, there was no overlap, you might say, with others. So too, if the pasuk then delineates Aaron u'banav, it would make sense to follow that Aaron and each son also had their specific station where they would be as well. Then the Gemara gives one final one. This was the one, the final one that the Gemara gives here. I think this is what I remember when we were learning Mishnayos on Tamid. I think that one of the Mefarshim I'd seen just went right to this last answer, what the Gemara gives now. The Gemara says here a final idea of how do we know from the pasuk that the Kohanim were in three distinct different stations overnight when they were serving in their shmirah. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar Misefa the Kra. Look at what how the pasuk says, the last part of the pasuk. The pasuk says Shomrim Mishmeres Limishmeres. It uses the term shmirah three distinct different times. Again, what was the full pasuk? The pasuk said, "Achonim lefnei Mishkan kedma lefnei Olam Moed Mizracha." Moshe, Kama says, who was east of the Mishkan before the Olam Moed to the east? That was Moshe. And then it says, "V'Aaron ubanav," and then Aaron and his two sons, Shomrim Mishmeres Hamikdash Lemishmeres. So it uses the word, the shoresh of that word of shmira being a shomer. It shows up in the pasuk three times. So Rav Ashi wants to darshan that based on the fact that the pasuk uses the word three times, shomrim, mishmeres, and then limishmeres uses the word three times, that seems to clearly indicate that the Kohanim who are going to be serving as shomrim in front of the Mishkan and then later in front of the Beis Hamikdash, they served in three distinct locations. Okay, let's hold it here for tonight. We'll continue, God willing, next time, Sunday night, top of Chav Vav Amud Aleph. We'll start the next Amud, and if you're using the elucidation in the back, that would be 26b1. So we'll start that, God willing, on Sunday. What's that? I'm sorry, Amud Beis. So that would be, again, Chav Vav Amud Beis. Chav Vav Amud Beis. We'll start, if you're using the front, and in the back, that would be 26b1. All right, we'll say a Kaddish Rabbana, Rabbi Chanani ben Akash, Rabbi Ratzah, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Lezakos Es Yisrael, Levikoch Yir Balam Torah Mitzvah Shenamar, Adonai Chafetz Laman Tzidko Yagil Torah V'Yadir. Amen.